story. Like you hear a great creepy story, like everybody's like, "Whoa!" And then what happened?
Have you heard of the Headless Valley
No,
in your comings and goings on the show, the
no,
Nahanni Valley?
no.
I got a good story for you. You want to hear it?
Okay.
Okay, so in Canada, there's this section in the Northwest called the Northwest Territories. Are you familiar with this?
Yes.
Okay, so for those that are not, the Northwest Territories is roughly 4 times the size of Germany. But Germany has something like 87 million people who live there. And in this space in Canada, this rugged space, there's like 45,000 people that live there. So it's 4 times the size of Germany and basically not populated. It is as remote as
Population
it
of Dripping Springs.
gets.
Not even.
Springs. Yeah, dude.
Not even. Dripping Springs probably has
Fuck,
more.
dude. And so within the Northwest Territory, there's this even more remote stretch that's called the Nahanni Valley. And the Nahanni Valley today, it's a protected park. It's a Canadian protected park. But even still, even though it's a park you can go visit, it's nearly impossible to get to. To get there by boat, you have to traverse these rapids. I think it's a very treacherous ride to get there by boat. There's no established roads into the Nahanni Valley. You can hike there. It's brutal to hike there. You can fly there, but it's only through chartered float planes. So it's a difficult place to get to. But the Nahanni Valley, in particular, when the story takes place, which is like the early 1900s, because of how isolated it was, it's like one of the parts of Earth that's like untouched by humans. And so the only people that would be in this huge sprawling valley, it was like an oasis of nature, they would see things that are just like so gorgeous, like untouched nature. But in the early 1900s, there was this push from gold prospectors to go out into the Nahanni Valley because they figured because it's so untouched by humanity, there's bound to be gold to be found in the Nahanni Valley. Now, there were some indigenous tribes like the Naha tribe. They were out there. There's some lore surrounding how they might have abandoned their settlement around the time the story takes place. But there were indigenous tribes that lived out there. But for the most part, it's like this sort of vacant stretch in this already isolated part of the world. And so in I think it's 1905, these three brothers, these three prospectors, the McLeod brothers, Charlie, Willie, and Frank, they're seasoned gold prospectors, they decide they are going to head off into the Nahanni Valley and go try to strike it rich. And it's even harder to get into the valley back then as it is today. It required for them, they actually had to build a boat. They had to bring pieces of a boat, and they would take it up a rapid or down the rapid, and they'd have to disassemble the boat, carry it up like these rock faces to get because there's waterfalls they had to get past, and then bring the boat further and further into this valley. And it's like this, it's just crazy how much work goes into getting out there. But these three brothers, they find their way into the valley, and they get to this stretch of this river called the Flat River, which is anything but. It's raging rapids. But there was this little embankment against this huge forest and like mountains off in the distance, and they made their camp there, and there's no one around. I mean, this is pristine wilderness, and they start sluicing for gold, and it's just fucking gold everywhere. It's like the sand is gold. There's gold everywhere. They find so much gold, and they can't believe it. They've struck it completely rich here. And so after a whole day, I think they did 3 days even of just getting all this gold, they pack all their shit back up in their boat that they've assembled, and they begin making their way back out again, which should be easier because now I think a lot of it you're going with the current. I don't even know how they get up there with the rapids going one way. But either way, they begin making their way out, and their boat capsizes, and they lose all their gold. The boat breaks up. They narrowly are able to salvage the pieces, and they come ashore and they build their boat again, and they're like, oh my gosh, we've lost so many supplies. This is horrible. The best we can do here is leave and come back with more supplies because we know there's gold here. Like, this is devastating, but no one's going to be here. We can come back. We can get more gold. So they leave. And once they get back to town, Charlie, one of the brothers, decides, you know what, it's not worth it. That was really sketchy. I don't want to die out on the Flat River. Frank and Willie, they're like, we got to go out there. And so fast forward a year, Charlie's still saying, I will not go back out there. But Frank and Willie, they decide to go. And they recruit this other guy. I think his name is Robert Weir. And so the three of them go back into the valley. to strike it rich. And, Charlie is aware that they're going out there. He's staying back, but he knows they're going out. He knows where they're going because he went there with them. And he expects they're going to be gone for, I think it was going to be a whole year. And you can imagine how much effort goes into getting out there. They were going to live out there, I think, for the summer and just get as much gold as they could and come out. But some amount of time passed, let's call it a year, when Charlie starts to become suspicious because they haven't come out of the valley yet. And this is 1905. There's no way to talk to them. And so another whole year passes. We're 2 years deep into this, and still these guys have not returned from the Nahanni Valley. And so at this point, Charlie is thinking there's an issue here. Something's happened to my brothers. I got to go find them. And so he puts together a group of people to go see what happened to his brothers. And so he makes his way, he starts getting into the valley, and he reaches this stretch of, this is just to give you a mental image of where he's going. To get to that segment of the beach where they had been 2 years prior when Charlie was with them, because that's where he's assuming they're going to be, they had to pass through these canyons. There's 4 canyons that go, I think it's Canyon 4, Canyon 2, 3, 1. They're all just called Canyon 1, 2, 3, 4, but they're staggering. I mean, just visually, these are just ominous places. There are these stretches like Canyon 2 is this 10-mile stretch of very deep water. I don't know how deep. I want to say it's at least 100 feet deep, where the water goes all the way up to the cliff face. It's just sheer cliff face on either side. So it's like the scar in the earth where it's hundreds of feet tall cliffs on either side that are sheer. And it's just, call it 100 feet at least of water down. There's nowhere to stop. Once you're in this canyon, you must go to the end of the canyon. There's nowhere to go.
Oh, fuck.
And the Naha tribe, who the tribe that had lived there for a while, they had always talked about, they called them the Wahila. They said there were these creatures, these white, tall creatures that would roam the forest in the Nahanni Valley, and they would make these screeching sounds, and they were, they would attack people. It's just folklore, right? But they said that in these canyons, there were all these caves, these pockets of caves high up on these canyons that you can't really get to, that they believed the Wahila would live inside of. So imagine you're going down this like misty 10-mile stretch in Second Canyon, and you're looking up on either side, and there literally are caves that no human has ever stepped foot in. You can't even get to these fucking caves. And because of the way the wind cuts through the canyon, it makes this echoey, like screeching noise that today you can still hear as you go through these canyons. And so they're going through Second Canyon, this stretch here. And the stretch of Flat River where he had been the year prior or 2 years prior with his brothers was at the end of Second Canyon, where the first little, call it a beachhead, exists. And so he, Charlie, and his search party, they exit this creepy Second Canyon, and they see there's a campsite set up on the beach. And it's not really a beach. It's like, 4 feet of sand, and then it's a little bit of hinterland, and then it's just, forest. But he sees there's a tent. And so they beach the boat, and they're looking around, and they find there's 2 bodies. It's a man, 2 men. They're badly decomposed, but they're missing their heads. So there's 2 headless men that are badly decomposed, one of which is reaching for his rifle, and he's half in the tent, half out of the tent, and he's reaching for his rifle, which is propped up against a tree, and the other is just lying behind the tent, and he's missing his head. The heads were never found. And they find identification, and it turns out those are his 2 brothers. And they find etched into the tree that the gun was propped on. It just was written, etched into the wood, we have found a fine prospect, which could mean any number of things. Maybe it means they found gold, whoever. But that was written on the tree. And then a little ways down from their camp, going along the same direction they'd come in, they found a skeleton, which they could never identify as being anyone, but they believe it belonged to Robert Weir. So they're all dead. And the authorities, when this was reported, they weren't really shocked. They're like, it's the Nahanni Valley. It's a dangerous place. They obviously died of starvation, and animal predation caused, their heads to be ripped off. Tough luck. Charlie didn't believe that. He always believed that something had happened to his brothers, but he had no way to prove it. So that's 1905. Fast forward to 1913, people sort of know about this story, that this is when they dubbed it the Headless Valley, because these men were found without their heads. Little did they know that story would carry quite a bit of weight, because 10 years or a little bit less than 10 years later, Martin Jorgensen, who's another gold prospector, he heads out into the Nahanni Valley. He's heard the stories. He's heard about the McLeod brothers. He knows that there's, lore of the Wahila and that there's something weird happening in this valley and it's dangerous. But he goes out there anyways, and he tells his business partners, who are these rich guys who didn't want to actually go get the gold. They just funded his expedition. He's like, I'm going to go out there and I'll make us a bunch of money. I'll find a bunch of gold. I'll stay out there for the whole summer. And then we'll rendezvous and we'll split the earnings or whatever. So out he goes and he builds himself a cabin not far from where the McLeod brothers had stayed, and then the second expedition as well. And he is out there for the summer, but then he misses the rendezvous point. He was supposed to come out of the valley and meet his partners at the end of the summer. He doesn't. Eventually, a search party is brought out to find what happened to him, and they find his cabin had burned to the ground. They find Martin Jorgensen is within the remains of this burned down cabin, missing his head.
Jesus.
And I don't know how they did this in 1913, but apparently the fire began on the roof. And so they don't understand how he could have not realized there was a problem and exited his cabin. I mean, it's simplifying it, but it's an odd thing that fire starts here and you still burn to the ground. And also, where's your head? So that's Martin Jorgensen. So now people, they aren't really connecting the McLeod brothers and Martin Jorgensen. It was called the Headless Valley by the time Martin Jorgensen gets into the valley. He's now found headless, and now it's like there's a little more rumor mill going on. Over the coming next 10 years, there was several other expeditions, to include this guy Riley O'Brien, who goes out there, prospector. He goes out to check his traps, doesn't come back. His partner who's with him, he walks over and finds him, and he's just sitting inexplicably by a campfire that's not on. It's not even, it was cold. It was cold enough to freeze to death out there, but it was not blindingly cold. And he's sitting in front of this fire pit. It's only been like an hour or two since he stepped away, and he's holding a match or a cigarette in his hand, and he's just like, he's frozen. He's frozen to death. And there's no sign of what happened to him. He's just sitting by the fire, and he's dead. He has his head, but he's frozen to death. The guy his partner who fled the valley would later say he looked flash frozen. So that happens. There were at least 2 other prospectors who also had their cabins burned down. One of them was nearly decapitated when he was found, but he still had his head, but signs of something being done to his spine was present. And then there was another 2 guys who their cabins burned down, but their bodies were intact. So there's all these people that die in similarly bizarre ways. And then in, I think it was 1926, the first really weird thing happens. This is all weird, but a really weird thing happens.
It's going to get weirder?
It gets weirder. There was this hunting party that went out to the Nahanni Valley. And by this point, it's become almost like because there's this lore surrounding how dangerous this place is, because people are fearful of the Nahanni Valley, it's now bringing a new crowd of people into the valley. It's bringing like hunting parties that kind of are like, I want to go fucking see what's out in this valley. And so they were going through Second Canyon, and they were heading to Flat River, and they were going to these places where all these kind of famous deaths have occurred to go hunting, but just sort of to be in this valley. And so this hunting party is out there. And it's a big group. I think there was at least a dozen people out there, and they're camping out on the banks of the Flat River, not really in the same spot where the McLeod brothers had been, but not too far away. And they're out drinking late, having a good old time. They all go to bed, and the next morning, May Lafferty is her name. May Lafferty. She's missing. She's I think she was the only woman on this expedition. She's gone, and they look for her. There's no sign of what happened to her. She's just gone. And so they did have some sort of a search occur over the next several days, but they ultimately said, we don't know what happened to her. And they left. They left the valley. And so they tell authorities. Authorities, I think they went out to look for her. They could never find her. No sign of what happened to her. And so around the time that they're looking for May Lafferty, there was this guy who is named Charlie, different from Charlie McLeod, just a sort of loner guy who just by happenstance had been camping in the Nahanni Valley at the same time as that hunting party. He was by himself, sort of just this rugged outdoorsman who, it's not even clear why he was out there, but he was just out there minding his own business. He was aware of the hunting party, and he said that he watched them have their party that night, and he had stayed up late but eventually gone to sleep. And he ultimately reports this to the police because there's all this talk of where's May Lafferty, and this guy Charlie realizes he may have seen her. So he goes to the police and he tells them, hey, I was out there. They don't know I was out there. I was out there at the same time, and I went to bed late at night after they were already asleep, and I woke up to the sound of rocks, like little rocks falling into the water. And he's relatively close to the water, but he's not so close that he would hear the sound of the current. He's far enough that a stone throw into the water, you'd hear the sploosh sound. And so he wakes up and he crawls out of his tent, and it's pretty well illuminated. And he's in the trees, and he can see the water, the flat river, and he can't tell what the rocks are coming from. It just sounds like rocks falling from a distance into the water. And so he just is curious, and he gets up and he walks down to the water line, and he starts hearing them more and more, and he looks up, and there's a part of the coastline, if you will, the beach line, that sort of was up on a rise to his left, like there was a hill that was right next to him. That's dramatic, just a slight rise. And there was a little bit of a cliff that maybe like 6 feet, 8 feet of a cliff that overlooked the river right there. And he sees there's this woman who's crawling on all fours, and she's scrambling up this little rise of the beach. And it's her kicking of the dirt that's like sprinkling rocks into the water. And he's looking at her, and she gets to the top, and she stops, and she turns around and looks at him, and he described her as looking possessed. He was like, there was something wrong with her. She just stared at me, and he was so frightened, he just froze and then hid. And he watched this woman scamper off into wherever she went, over the rise away from the camp. So she's gone, and he didn't know what to make of it. He's like, that's so weird. He hears about this missing woman. He tells police, and he sees a picture of her, and he's like, I'm nearly positive that was her. And so she's never found. And so May Lafferty's gone. Fast forward another 20 years. So there's no idea. In those 20 years, more prospectors are found dead as well. One of the last hunting parties went out into the Nahanni Valley. And actually, prospector goes out, and he goes missing. His name is John Patterson. This is like in the 1939, 1940 range. And a hunting party goes out to look for him, and they can't find him. And on the last night they were there, one of the men who was part of this search party for John Patterson, they're near the Flat River, he described an indigenous man walked out of the tree line, just sort of inexplicably walks over to him, and he comes up to the group who are sort of on the beach line there. And he just says to this guy, he's like, hey, and they're startled to see him to begin with. Like, where the fuck did you come from? And he's like, be careful. The Wahila are out tonight. And the guy just like wanders. This is, according to legend, this is what was said to him. And the guy wanders back off into the trees. But the leader of that expedition, they were planning to stay, I want to say 2 additional days to keep looking for John Patterson. But that night, following that comment made by that guy, the indigenous guy, all night they reported these ungodly screams and screeches coming from that canyon, second canyon, where those caves up in the cliffs were, all around the forest. Like unearthly sounds were being made that scared them so badly that the next day they said, we're not looking for John Patterson anymore, and they bailed. And so people stopped going into the Nahanni Valley, and today you can still go there. It's still very hard to get there, but no one has a good explanation for why so many fucking people from 1903 or 4 until at least the 1940s kept going into that valley and kept turning up dead, many of which without their heads.